Welcome to this week's episode of Coffee in the Barn. This week we're going to be mixing it up a little bit and showcasing some exclusive content behind the scenes with our speakers. The whole idea behind Coffee in the Barn is a passion project, hopefully turning into an awesome nonprofit for women in agribusiness. Your support would mean a lot as we get started and to go towards the production costs of the podcast. You can help support us by only $3 a month. Subscribers gain exclusive access to in-depth content, personal development tips, and an insider's view on navigating the complexities of life and career with expertise and empathy. This episode is just a snapshot of some of the content that will be available through this monthly subscription. With that, let's dig into this week's episode, and we thank you all for listening.
Welcome to this week's episode of Coffee in the Barn. This week we have the privilege of speaking with nurse practitioner and entrepreneur and mom to two little kids, Traci Eliszewski. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So I know we've known each other for a while. We're actually neighbors. I went to high school with your younger sister. Our kids are roughly the same age. Would you mind just telling our audience a little bit more about you and kind of your career path and how motherhood has kind of fit into and molded you into the person that you are today?
Yeah, absolutely.
The loaded question.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So, I started my career as a nurse actually at Beloit Memorial Hospital. I was a kind of a step-down cardiac intermediate ICU nurse, step-down ICU nurse. And so loved my job for sure. But my goal was always, I wanted to be more in the provider role. So I went back to school right away. I got my master's in nursing as an adult gerontology acute care nurse practitioner. So really trying to be, patients coming into the ER, these acute care patients coming in, I wanted to know exactly how to take care of these patients. And that's just kind of always been my drive is I have to be, I have to be the best at what I do. That's who I've always been. And so I felt like that kind of career gave me that. And so I loved that job. My first NP job was actually in neurology at Northwestern. I ran a neurology consult service in the hospital. So I was like a neurohospitalist. It was by far my most favorite job to start. And then my husband, who's Dr. Traci Eliszewski, he's a chiropractor, and he was always more, functional medicine based, and always was there's more to medicine, right? There's more to just prescribing medications and things like that. And so it was always in my ear, right? And now obviously I thank him because he's a huge part of where I'm at. So he took a job back in Edgerton, which is our hometown, born and raised in Edgerton, Wisconsin. And so we came back. He worked with a local chiropractor here. It was perfect. Fast forward 3 years, we're this functional medicine, it was kind of eating at both of us. We're there's more to health, right? There's more. Cellular medicine is a big deal. And we just felt like we were missing so much of that in both our chiropractic and our nurse practitioner jobs at the time. So fast forward, I take a job at a local hospital in Madison working as a hospitalist. So I was an internal medicine provider in the hospital. And what my job was to admit patients and discharge them eventually and take care of them in the hospital. And it was just one of those things where I was we don't do a great job of educating patients of how not to come back to the hospital. Cause I like seeing my patients, but I'd rather see you at the local farmer's market or something like that. So we don't have the time. It just doesn't work in the acute care medicine model. So, again, fast forward, and I'll always remember the date. So February 1st of 2021, we opened our own functional medicine clinic. At that time, it was under an affiliate program called the Wellness Way. So we were called the Wellness Way Fitchburg for a little bit. And then March 1st of 2021, I have my daughter. So we opened a brand new clinic February 1st, and March 1st, I have my daughter. And it was just, we also had some other things kind of happening in our life at that time. It was a crazy whirlwind of emotions, experiences, and looking back, it was the best part in our journey to getting to where we both are now. We have that clinic. I kind of got sought out by another clinic actually right next door physically to where our clinic was in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, and got poached a little bit. And this clinic is now who I work for now. It's called Forum Health. It's a clinic based where we just moved to Monona, Wisconsin. So what this did is this gave me the opportunity to work full-time and not have to work full-time at the hospital and part-time at our functional medicine clinic in Fitchburg. So it made things a little bit easier. Fast forward a couple of years, we were running 2 clinics essentially. When I took over for Forum, I'm the main provider there. So it was very much, okay, let's get this clinic up and running. And then my husband, we were running the Wellness Way Fitchburg and Forum Health. And I was like, this is crazy. We're both driving ourselves nuts. Like, we should combine forces. And so Drew joined me at Forum Health last April. And so we've kind of merged since then. Our clinic has grown like crazy amount. I think we've had like a 200% growth at least since last year at this point. Oh. We've now hired two nurses. I have 2 nurses. We just hired another nurse practitioner who's also a midwife. So there's 3 providers now, and then an office manager, and we just hired a front desk not too long ago too. So it's been a crazy ride. But in terms of like your first question is like, when you're in the entrepreneur space, right, it's always like there's always work to be done, right? Because you have to continue to level up your skill set. And so that can be really hard when you have kids, right? Like, it can be super hard because there's a lot of mom guilt, right? There's a lot of like, I want to be in 2 places at once, but I know, for Drew and I, we're always like, okay, but we're doing this, right, to set our families up for generational wealth and things like that. Like, that's really kind of our goal and all of that. So it can be super lonely at times. I'm entrepreneur, I listen to a lot of entrepreneurs and all the podcasts and things, and it's never linear, right? You have a lot of ups and downs where you're like, there's days where I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I feel like I'm lost, right? And then the next day I'm on top of the world saying like, all right, I'm ready to kick butt. Like, let's do this, So it's a lot. And I know I just like rambled on probably in like 20 topics right there, but that's how I'm at now. So at Forum Health, my goal really is, I always sit down with a patient and say, okay, how do I have the next 60 years of your life be the best 60 years, right? And that comes down to a lot of hormonal balance. It comes down to a lot of inflammation, finding the root cause of inflammation, which is the major driver to most of our disease states, and just optimizing health. We want health optimization, not just normalization, if that makes sense.
So you use the term functional medicine. What would be your definition of that?
Yes.
I mean, I think you kind of already hinted on that, but just for because I think that's a new area within the healthcare industry. And
yes.
I don't want to say a new buzzword, but that's what I think it would be.
It's a great question. So my practice, I do a little bit of a lot of types of medicine. So functional medicine is what we call root cause medicine, right? So an example of this would be, okay, well, you were just put on high blood pressure medications, but why are you on high blood pressure medications? And my question is like, okay, how do we manage that, fix it, find out what's causing it, right? And try to get you off the medications over time is the whole goal. So it's kind of like, is your high blood pressure due to, is there genetic component to that? Is it actually like a physiological problem where blood pressure medications are needed? Obviously, I'm not taking patients off blood pressure medications if they need them, but there's a lot of studies, right? Like, is it a heavy metal exposure? That's why you're having high blood pressure. So it's just trying to figure out root cause, what's making that symptom happen. Then I would say functional medicine is kind of the gold standard root cause medicine. Then I use integrative medicine a lot. So integrative medicine is kind of combining the 2 worlds. It's using traditional acute care medicine and functional medicine to say, okay, we have these really cool supplements, herbs, diet, stress response, sleep. And then also, if I need a blood pressure medication, I'm going to put you on a blood pressure medication while I'm fixing all that. So that's kind of integrative. And then regenerative medicine, which is like a huge love of mine, like combining with all of them. But regenerative medicine is kind of, it's using, I think of like joints right away, right? Trying to preserve joints, trying to save patients, i.e. myself, from having knee replacements after blowing both of them apart in college, right? So, so regenerative medicine is kind of using like things like platelet-rich plasma or PRP or peptides. I do a lot of peptides in my practice, things to just kind of regenerate that joint space. And so I think, our practice is a little bit different in the fact that we combine all of these because we have the forces to combine all of those together. So using Dr. Drew as the chiropractor, I'm like, all right, you have to go see him because he's going to assess your squat so you don't hurt your knee again, right? And then maybe I inject it with a little PRP or ozone, things like that, that just is a little bit outside of the box. So it is functional, it is integrative, it is regenerative. Anti-aging is another branch of medicine, I would say, combines all of that together. So it can be very confusing though. So yes, but functional medicine is really that root cause medicine.
It's amazing how far that we've come, over the last, so many years. But it's also, I think, really unique that you have the opportunity to be able to do that within somewhat of a traditional system and be able to have the resources externally and internally to kind of do what is best for your patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, this isn't something that like if you go to your traditional medicine doctor and talk about, which is where I think I think we lack that, right? Like my goal, no one talks about hormones in traditional medicine. I mean, we do, but we don't touch on like the importance of them, right? We don't touch on like how do we fix this stuff, right? It's very there's lots of other stuff to that. So my goal would be to like start fixing the traditional medicine training, because all of this stuff that I'm talking about now is me having to basically relearn and re-educate myself in all of this.
And I feel like a lot of it is very, I don't want to say common sense, but like, you eat the right foods, you do the correct exercises. It's a lot of preventative health type
Totally
practices as well.
Yes, definitely.
Is there any, through the years of research and training that you've had within this integrative functional health space, has there been anything that you've been able to take and apply to your kids as being a mom? And because our audience is a lot of women in agriculture and working women in general with families. Is there any advice that you have for them that could kind of help?
I mean, with kids, right, they're resilient. And I'm an adult acute care nurse practitioner. So I always say, like, when it comes to, I don't treat kids in the office, but I do have kids, right? So like I have my own little, things every single day that I'm trying to work with. So Drew, though, he's great with kids. But kids are resilient. And the fact that so much of what they are, so much comes down to diet. And so, getting that good kind of gut microbiome, right? If they should have normal bowel movements, right? It's all the stuff that we talk about as adults, but it's even more important for them because they're little, I always like right now, like my one kid, Knox, is in preschool and my daughter is in daycare, and they're like walking petri dishes, right? So like, how do I, set them up for success so that if they do get something, right, it's very good to build that immune system for sure. But like if their gut's healthy and we're trying to feed them the right foods and trying to stay away from those inflammatory things, I have a lot of moms. Every single conversation with my moms always comes up to talk about their kids because that's what we do, right? And so I just say, like, if you really hone in their diet and you try to stay away from those inflammatory foods, or if they're having skin issues, right, like there's things to kind of weed out initially and always add them back in. But right now, like those things that are secondary right now are it's a problem of inflammation and it's coming from somewhere. So honing in diet, make sure they're getting that deep sleep, their sleep state is so important. And then just making sure their gut is off, so they're not off. So having like daily bowel movements and, not having any kind of skin or constant, sinus infections or constant ear infections. Chiropractic care is so valuable for that. So just getting the nervous system and immune system to align is huge.
What would be some of your, you mentioned inflammatory foods. What would be your top 5?
Yes.
Or top 1
in an acute flare, right? And I'm a farmer's daughter. Remember, like had dairy farms growing up. We had grain, all this stuff. But in an acute flare, right? Number one thing I'm going to say is sugar, right? Sugar in kids, that has a lot to do with their mood, right? Dyes can be huge, right? Dyes, if you take dyes away from, especially like the red dyes are the ones that like the kids can't process sometimes. And sometimes it comes down to a methylation, like a genetic SNP, like their bodies just cannot methylate these things appropriately or detox things appropriately. If they're having skin anything, I definitely like think about gluten and dairy, just being that it's not forever, but just trying to limit something while we're healing their gut at the same time. A lot of times sinus stuff can be a mold allergy of some sort. Dairy can contribute a little bit to it, but it's all about just kind of like really see like what their peak immune system is doing and then adding those things back in. And when you add them back in, you just kind of do it one at a time to see like, are they flaring? Like, is it a flare again? If not, it's a safe food, go for it. Sugars and dyes though, I always say like, okay, let's limit them as much as possible. Now, obviously you cannot, police your child every minute of the day. Right. So, but yeah, they are resilient. So making sure their sleep, making sure their gut health is optimal, a lot of times will heal itself for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing I've definitely noticed. I've now started our 3-year-old on a multivitamin every day, which I wasn't necessarily doing before, but I was like, okay, there's so much stuff going around all the time that we just need to like cover our bases. I mean, she eats
for sure
vegetables okay, but like not every day.
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
I've noticed how much a probiotic helps.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Especially with the making sure that she stays regular.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are huge, right? Probiotic, I feel like with kids, it's a multivitamin, a probiotic. Make sure they're staying hydrated. That's the other thing is like, I feel like we kind of forget about that from time to time. And then if they're having like GI issues or stuff like that, we'll actually use other supplements just to kind of help them maybe kind of detox or kill some stuff off from time to time. And it's pretty phenomenal. Like we don't do them in our clinic, but you can do like parasite cleanses with kids, and it's pretty crazy like what happens if you have somebody that has or a kid with a parasite for sure. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
I can't imagine something coming out of my child.
You'd be surprised how many my aunt was telling me. She's like, yeah, my mom grew up on a farm, 5 kids on the farm outside all the time. And unfortunately parasites are everywhere, right? Like we do a lot of stool testing at our clinic because true functional medicine, right, a lot of it starts in the gut. So you heal the gut, a lot of other things improve. And so parasites are very common. But my grandmother was like, well, advanced, right? She would literally give her kids parasite cleanses. I think like once a year they got them. And like my aunt was saying, like the stuff that came out was kind of crazy sometimes. So yeah, very smart. That's I mean, that's huge for your health.
Oh, well, I can just imagine. I mean, like we have dogs and, they're outside eating whatever's outside.
Totally.
And then they come inside and then like lick the kid's mouth or the hands or whatever. Yeah. I feel like it's pretty easy to pass something like that around from
for sure.
And
the body should, the immune system is there for a reason, right? But yeah, it's always surprising. I always tell my patients when we're going through the stool test, I'm like, the parasites, the testing is on there for a reason because they show up way more than I would ever like to see, and they're very common, and they can lead to a lot of GI issues. So yeah, we screen for them every single time we do a stool test.
What has been your, or do you have a case that's just kind of stuck in your mind as like one to remember?
Yeah, I had one actually. So I do a lot of hormones, a lot of peptides, a lot of blood sugar regulation, right? Because those are huge for our future health, preventative health aspects. One thing that I just did more recently, so, when I sit down with a patient and I look at, what their health goals are, why they're coming to see me, I always say like, okay, we can optimize hormones and blood sugar and thyroid and, we'll talk about stress and cortisol response, all those things make up, like we'll optimize that. But if we sit down and you're still feeling tired or fatigued, or there's still something kind of, else kind of, you just don't feel like you did when you were 35, right? I always say like when you're 102, that's when you can be tired, is really what I tell my patients. So like until then, I have a 92-year-old who still comes into my clinic, wears, high heels and red lipstick, and she's like got it going on, right? So I'm like, whatever that is, I'm like, that's what I want.
Yes.
we want health. We want health span, not lifespan, right? We want health span. We want to feel good. And so a lot of that comes down to hormones and blood sugar, all that kind of stuff. But if you're still having symptoms after that, then I'm like, okay, what else is there? And this is the stuff really in the functional medicine space that, traditional medicine has a hard time catching up to it, right? I always say like we're about 30 years behind the times in medicine when it comes to like adapting this stuff in the research, looking at it. And so I just had this case like a week ago. This was a woman. She was she's in her late 40s. She's done everything for weight loss, literally has tried every diet, every medication, everything, and could not lose weight. Everything she said to me, like when she sat down, she had fatigue, she had low energy, she couldn't lose weight, she was tired all the time, she had brain fog. All of her hormones like looked okay, right? That we optimized a couple things, but for the most part, like everything was kind of working. Her GI system wasn't terrible. Fast forward, right? When I think about the total toxic burden in the body, right? So we think about like, okay, what is our exposure? What is our, mold and Lyme disease, right? So common, especially where we live in the Midwest here. And so for her, like everything she was kind of talking about, I was like, gosh, it sounds like she's had a significant mold exposure at some point. And so she had been trying to lose weight for, I think it was 4 years. By the time she saw me, nothing worked. Even our coolest latest peptides and things like that, nothing worked. We found that she had a high amount of mold. She remediated. Sometimes that's like it can be a process for sure. She remediated. Immediately she felt like she could breathe better in her house and her son, which is pretty crazy. And then just by getting rid of the mold, we started doing like a protocol to help bind toxins and things like that. It was the first time she's lost weight in 4 years. So that was like a really kind of it took some work to like get there and find it and remediate it and do the protocol and just kind of decrease that toxic load. But I always say that's not only important for your health now to help you lose weight and make you feel better and have less brain fog. It's more important for your future health, right? Because we know a lot of autoimmune diseases, a lot of, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, a lot of that is toxic load. And so if we start removing that, that's very important for your health now.
Was it just like a mold in her house?
She was getting exposed daily at work, which that's a really hard conversation, right?
Yeah.
And she did have it in her house. So they had a leak, which they were not aware of. And so they remediated that. And then the work obviously is hard, right? She works for a big corporation. So you can't just go like, hey, I'm being exposed to this, right? Despite having the test. So for that, it's kind of like, okay, let's just make sure like when you are at work, we have a good air purifier that's actually going to kill mold spores. And I'm not a mold expert. I will tell you that. Like I definitely treat more and more of it now because for the longest time I tried to ignore it. I was like, okay, we're going to optimize your hormones and your thyroid and all that kind of stuff, right? And if you have this, if you're not better, then we'll look for it. I actually deemed my husband, Dr. Drew, the biotoxin mold guy. And he is, I would say, an expert. He's mentored with some of like the most prominent biotoxin molds, chronic disease guys in the country. And so I'm lucky enough that obviously I can bounce things off of him if I'm not getting anywhere or if it's not improving. But it's definitely something you really have to understand the body and the cellular medicine part of that and knowing that like this stuff takes time for sure. But for her, it was just one of my latest wins. I would say that like I just remember her being so frustrated when she came to see me and we had actually started to see some improvement. So
wow. And it's amazing because I feel like mold specifically can the symptoms from it can show up in multiple different ways, can't they?
Totally. So a lot of people have that like chronic sinusitis, brain fog, headaches, vision changes. There's actually like a really a screen that we'll start with just to like test your visual acuity. And mold is hard because you could have two patients, right, live in the same house and depending on their genotype, right? So like if they have, there's a gene called the HLA gene. And so if they have that gene specifically, that person with that genetic predisposition is going to have a harder time detoxing from that mold than the other person. The other person might not have any symptoms at all. So it's just, it's hard to kind of piece out because you could be like, well, I'm not getting sick. Is it the environment? Actually, the number one place that most of us are exposed to mold is school systems. So, if our immune system can handle it, perfect, right? Your immune system can handle a lot of stuff that's thrown at. That's the whole goal of it. But some people have that genetic predisposition and they can have a little bit harder time detoxing from it.
Oh, wow. You bring up, a lot of schools are quite old, I would say.
Yes.
I wonder, that's constant exposure, probably. Yes. I don't want to say that's a root cause of some behavioral issues at schools, but I never thought of that.
Yeah, there was a school just shut down. I think it was either Ohio or Indiana. This was like last year. The elementary school shut down because the mold was so terrible.
My goodness.
I know. It's like once you go into this space, once you go into here, you're like always my radars are always up. Yeah.
Well, you're always the first. You and Drew are always the first ones where I'm like, okay, what do I use for this? What do I use for that? I don't want to use antibiotics.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the beauty. Like, and the other thing is like, there's so much research on this. Like it's, everything we do is I look at more research now in the medicine I do now than I ever did in the hospital system. And that's just because, it's not something that you go to any provider and they just know what to do. Like I have to feel very validated and I have to feel, I have to see the results.
That's very similar on the animal agriculture side. We run 45,000 pigs through our research facilities, trying to prove different nutritional concepts. And, if something's not working, we figure out, okay, why, but, we let the pigs tell us.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you have anything else to add on about you?
I just, I don't know. We're just always learning. And so, that's just the biggest thing I think with combining all of it is like a mom, an entrepreneur, and, we learn for our patients for sure, but it's like when you're in an entrepreneur space, right, in medicine specifically, you really have to, and that's why we're like constantly going to to seminars and learning from, I mean, I pay a lot of money for mentorship with other physicians one-on-one, because that's the other difference is like, I can't just go shadow somebody. They're like, yeah, you can shadow me, but you're gonna pay me $5,000 for the day, right? Like that's the reality of this. And I totally get it, right? Because looking at how much I've spent already this year on CME, it's a constant learning, but it's a different kind of space. So it's, I always like the entrepreneur role. Like my parents have always been entrepreneurs, and I didn't understand that honestly until the past like 2 years. I'm like, it's a different type of love. But when you combine the medicine and love, or medicine and research, like whatever, the same thing you guys are doing, right? Like you have to stay up on that, and that can be exhausting in itself, but no place I'd rather be, honestly.
Could you elaborate a little bit more for our agriculture audience on kind of what, you alluded to, you grew up on a crop farm, and what kind of other animals did you guys have, or can you give us a little bit of highlight on your agriculture background?
Sure. So I grew up, my dad's going to probably be mad that I don't know the number specifically, but I feel like we've farmed anywhere from like 7,000 to almost 9,000 acres, right? And so it's a lot of corn, it's a lot of soybeans, there's wheat. Growing up, the highlight of my summers was tobacco, right? So Edgerton is the tobacco city of the world. We used to grow it in the planter beds. And I know my dad's just laughing because they all think like I never helped, but I totally was out there in the tobacco fields. There's pictures to prove it. And so we would grow the tobacco, and then we would plant it. So a lot of time on the planter growing up, harvest it. So for a while, I mean, I know at some point we were doing, again, sorry, Dad, over 100 acres, I think at some point, maybe it was 99 acres. And then we shifted down to like 50 acres. Because for those of you who don't know, tobacco is definitely, like, I would argue, like the most, yes, labor intensive. And so we don't do tobacco anymore. There are still farms around Edgerton that do. But we did a lot of tobacco growing up. And so, we had a couple dairy farms growing up. I remember doing that. We had pigs. We had a lot of pigs at one point. And then we had cows kind of growing up. The problem was I would get attached to these cows. And so, like, when I came home and they weren't there, I was still scarred about Rosie, the cow, that my sister and I would hand feed grass. She never came back. But I mean, I would never change. I mean, growing up on a farm, honestly, and again, like just the whole, looking back, the entrepreneur role that my dad and my family, so, it's a third generation farm. So my brother, my dad, and my uncle run it now, and my grandpa as well. But he, my grandpa Jim, he was the one that kind of started all the craziness, and it's just kind of continued to evolve, and they're just really smart in everything they do. So farmers, definitely, I have a lot of patience that these hardworking guys that come in and they just don't feel good. I'm like, I just need to get you to feel better because you remind me so much of my dad. So let's get working on this. So, but farmers definitely have a soft spot in my heart for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you very much for all that insight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really appreciate it. I'm learning stuff. I feel like every single conversation I have with you and Drew, it's like I just learn something new every single time.
Yeah. I would say, like, I feel like no one really knows what we do, right? Like we, because we've been like at 2 different clinics and we've merged, and then like I'm just getting to the point now that I'm like, the more people find out, I'm actually doing a talk this weekend for another client that asked me to she's like, just come share, just let people like talk to you, right? Like it's I don't know, like in the world of, I just tell, networking, right? Like I always say, like, and then when patients like start talking to Drew and I feel like they're just like, they have that like overwhelmed face that I tell Drew. I'm like, okay, now we've overwhelmed them. Now there's too much. So, but yeah, I think we're going to start doing more kind of like live events, and I think the podcast will help too, just to know, like, I feel like with Drew and I, and there's a lot of other great practitioners too, but like, we're so like committed to like, just if someone comes in with a problem, and this is probably like, we talk about sleep and stress and all that kind of stuff and how important it is, but like, I can promise you that there's probably no other 2 minds in the world, right? A husband and wife duo that are constantly talking about like, okay, how do I get this patient better, right? They're not improving. Like, what else do I need to do? I always tell patients, like, if you were to like come sit in my kitchen for a day, you'd be bored to tears with like our conversations sometimes. So yeah, it's a whole lot sometimes, but it's great.
I think it's cool though, because I mean, I don't know of anyone else in Edgerton that's doing what you guys are doing. And I mean, I get the same sometimes too when people are like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I feed pigs. Realistically, I feed pigs, but the job itself is a lot more than that, but just like to explain
Yes.
it easily, I'm just going to say I feed pigs."
Yes. 100%. 100%.
Because then you do get the
Yeah.
like glaze in the eye of like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes. And that's I really try to prevent that look from my patients, but I know at the end of it, just because we cover so much, and like when I sit down with a patient, our first initial consults are like up to an hour and a half long, right? So we really kind of, when we talk about functional medicine, like we're talking about root cause. So like if you come in with a symptom, my first thought is like, okay, well, when did that start, right? What preceded that symptom to start? And like that's the trigger, like or a lot of times it starts even sooner than that. So yeah, we have a whole lot, but yeah, a lot of my patients, and I really try to, I'm like, okay, let's get this together. I want to make you feel good leaving here. I don't want you to have like a million questions. So yeah.
No, for sure. Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.